both restoration, recovery and staff support. So you'll see there's quite a lot of detail in my report around the staff support piece, whether it be the challenges specifically associated with the BAME group of staff that we have and the work going on nationally and locally to understand the specific challenges in that staff group, or the wider offer that we're providing to our staff. I've had various messages both internally and externally from the likes of UHNM to thank me, and not just me, of course, to thank the organisation and specifically the staff counselling service for all of their hard work over the last period of time. They've worked tirelessly to ensure that our staff do receive, when they need it, that counselling input. So I'm really proud and pleased with the level of support that to date we've given to our staff. And of course, the challenge for us now is to ensure that that doesn't just continue as is, but we bolster that over the next period as people start to feel fatigued and more pressure, as the COVID piece isn't going to go away anytime soon, as we all know. The restoration recovery element then, just to quickly touch on that, I'm conscious we've got a paper later on. The Centre has published a document that describes 4 phases of the COVID management programme, from the reactive piece that we are at the back end of, I would hope to say, although it may return depending on the number of surges that we see going forwards. The restoring of services that perhaps were stopped as a result of that reactive period. The recovery phase, which is the developmental piece, goes beyond restoring, but moving to the next phase of transformation and going all the way through to that transformational piece, which I think the Centre are terming the new NHS, which is from around April 2021 and beyond, which is probably when new contracts, etc., will kick in. But the key, of course, the key challenge is to ensure that all of the positives that have come from this really challenging situation are grasped, and we maximise the benefits that we have seen come over a matter of weeks, when perhaps things like attend anywhere video conferencing for our service users has been debated for many years. Bookie's been a real advocate of that, and lo and behold, we now have hundreds of those attend anywhere attendances happening regularly, which is fantastic. So how do we keep that and make it even better over coming months and into the next year? So that's what I wanted really to talk about in terms of the COVID response and position and next steps. The only other thing I wanted to pick out was the combat racism piece that Tosca has been hugely involved in, as you would imagine, in terms of her role within Show Racism the Red Card. But as you'll read within my report, she's ensured that we link up with some heavy hitters, shall I call them that, across the NHS, Simon Stevens, etc., and has produced a video that that fundamentally addresses the level of racism, discrimination that still exists in pockets of the NHS, sadly, and showcases that through people's voices, and specifically showcases, of course, the opportunity that we've got to eradicate that. So I'm hugely proud to say that Tosca has been absolutely key to the development of that that video. And if you haven't seen it yet, please do log on and have a look. I think that's all I wanted to mention in terms of the CEO report. But as always, happy to take any questions or comments. I've tried to monitor the chat screen as I've been talking. It's hard to multitask as a male, but I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any questions come in, but happy to take them verbally.
Chair, can I ask a question to Peter?
Yes, of course.
Where is the testing physically taking place these days, and is there sufficient of it, and will there be sufficient of it when we move to antigen and antibody testing?
So on the second one, your guess is as good as mine, although Chris might, I'll ask Chris to come in a second maybe, because Chris has been doing great work through the logistics cell for the system on this, so he's linked in. But so the answer at the moment is it's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So there was a point when we felt that we could use the UHNM capacity to manage all of our internal requirements for the system in terms of testing. A best case scenario of, I think it was well over 100 a day tests could have been done through that lab. Subsequently, given that there's now a requirement, and understandably a requirement, to test individuals that go into or come out of care homes or transition between any of our NHS services, that capacity effectively is now fully utilised for testing patients. So what we basically have is an in-NHS facility in Staffordshire for testing patients, but zero capacity essentially for testing our staff. So the mechanisms that we've got through Bet365 Stadium, the Stoke City Stadium, and I think Burton have also got one at Burton Albion Stadium there, are being utilised as best we can to test our staff. We've also got facilities out of area, and you might have heard on PM's, it was even raised on PM's questions not long ago, the option of people heading up from Stoke-on-Trent up to Manchester down to Birmingham, which isn't tenable basically. So we've got an ambition at the moment to convert our local facilities at the football stadia into basically national testing centres, so they become formally approved as national testing centres. And what that means is, once that formal position is given, that provides a whole host of other resources to that centre, including support from the army, antibody, various bits and pieces. So that's the current ambition. I don't think we're there yet in terms of that approval, but we hope that it's imminent. Chris, can I just say, is there anything to add above that, over and above that?
So Bet365 Stoke City Stadium and the Pirelli Stadium at Burton are the two big testing sites. I guess you're absolutely right, Peter. There are then other testing facilities at St George's, so MPFT, and on site at UH&M. As Peter says, there is now constraint on our ability to test everyone that we think would need testing, and over the past couple of weeks, the qualifying criteria, for want of a better word, of those cohorts of staff who would be testing have changed somewhat. So all care home residents and care home staff now included, as well as non-elective admissions into the acute hospitals, and that has put further strain on testing capacity, as well as then reagent availability. So the kind of raw material that's needed to conduct the testing. And as Peter rightly says, then that's really constrained testing capacity, particularly at UH&M, and UH&M now haven't got the ability to test anyone other than their patients, essentially. So as a system, we need to identify alternative laboratory capacity. I think UH&M were looking to the northwest as of yesterday, but perhaps don't quote me on that. And then the other issue then is around timeliness of the test results, and I think in large part that's not been as timely as we would like, and in some cases people have completed their kind of self-isolation prior to getting the test result back. So there have been, since the testing arrangements were stood up, quite some considerable challenges, and that remains the case going forward, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I mean, it sounds challenging. So I won't ask any follow-up questions, because you've explained where we are, which is clearly a bit up in the air at the moment.
Chair, could I just ask a couple of questions? Peter, could you just say a little bit more about where we are in Stoke-on-Trent, North Staffordshire, in terms of the relativity of the numbers of cases? Because there seems to be a sense that we have perhaps a higher rate than perhaps other parts of the country. And also, could you perhaps just elaborate a little bit about protective equipment and so on for staff in the community, and also for care homes, please?
Yeah, sure. So you are right in sort of suggesting that the Stoke-on-Trent prevalence data is not going in the same direction as the Staffordshire data. And that's not necessarily to say that it's spiking well above the peak that we saw in other areas nationally. So the West Midlands has been more affected than the East Midlands, for example, but that specifically relates to certain pockets. So Birmingham and the Black Country have been particularly affected, and that's for a number of reasons. So what we're seeing, I think, in Stoke is a bit of a delayed reaction in terms of the impact for the population in Stoke-on-Trent. Clearly, it's a worry. It's still a big concern, particularly as we can see in University Hospital North Midlands, for example, the bed capacity levels. We a number of weeks ago, there were a lot of beds unoccupied because we did great work as a system in discharging. That unoccupied number has significantly reduced. And if you add to that the increase in prevalence that we're still seeing in Stoke-on-Trent, that of course combines to be a real worry. Less beds available than we had at what we thought was the spike, and a still increasing numbers. So that, yes, we have still got very specific challenges in Stoke-on-Trent. What I would say though is that the system is by no means under immense pressure, although volumes are higher than we would like, both combined, UHNM, primary care, I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine 111, etc., aren't at or above their capacity levels, their limits. So we still are able to manage effectively, albeit obviously it remains a concern that those rates are going in the wrong direction. Specifically in terms of PPE and our community teams and care homes, what so I would say for
as well.
And GP, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, and obviously we run two practices, so that's directly relevant to us as well. The guidelines that we have that are from the centre that we've had for a period of time now and are tweaked occasionally, but not substantially for us, are adhered to across our services. We make sure that that occurs on a daily, weekly basis. So we monitor the adherence to that. We make sure that stocks go out regularly. We make sure that each area, so we operate effectively in a hub and spoke way. So each of our spokes, local locations, have sufficient PPE. We try not to do it in a just-in-time way. We try and give ourselves as much flexibility as we can, so that we don't, we don't phone into the centre to say we are now out of stocks. Please hurry up. We make sure that we do that call before we run out within combined, so that people have always got some stock on the shelves ready to use. So I'm not aware of any significant issues associated with PPE across combined. And primary care, similarly, in terms of the approach that we take is as per national guidance in terms of social distancing. I think something like 90+% of our contacts with patients are done remotely within primary care. So only a small cohort of triage patients are then invited in for face-to-face consultations. And of course, when those consultations then occur, social distancing, PPE, whatever is needed is provided to our GP colleagues. So my understanding is that we're managing as effectively as we can. Similarly, in terms of if our staff go in, whether it be counselling or other support, mental health support, into care homes, we make sure that our staff are fully protected. I struggle to speak on behalf of the care homes themselves, but we make sure that we do what is needed for our staff.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, could I come in at some point?
Yes, of course. How about now?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I think this is the best chance on the agenda for us to just give, in a sense, might give our report back on from what we're hearing from staff and our members. So first of all, in terms of our trust, I mean, and then forgive me because I've said some of this at the recent PCD meeting. I think we've been an exemplar of how we've managed that with our staff in terms of communications and our approach to redeployment. I'm sure some of my members might have some complaints somewhere, but in terms of overall, in terms of our approach, communications has been very good. And in terms of our approach to redeploying staff and moving staff, I welcome the approach that I think has been led by the HR in terms of looking to seek to encourage, persuade, not compel people to go into areas of work where staff for the first time in my career are generally frightened about working in some areas of the NHS and services. It's one thing to be worried, but we've had people on the phone that are genuinely frightened. But in terms of our trust, because I do cover a couple of employers, and we have been fielding questions from members from outside the NHS trusts, but in the wider health community. I think we have done a really good job. I wanted that to go on record. You mentioned the health and wellbeing. We've shared within our union some of the videos that Jan Summerfield's team have produced. So and that's been well received. So I think it can be seen to be recognised elsewhere. Just to add, because you've been talking about the wider health community in Staffordshire, we have been receiving calls from members working in care homes and GP surgeries, and that all through this has been really concerning and distressing. I mean, the calls that we received early doors from staff in care homes begging to be able to wear masks, being told, and the advice from Public Health England they weren't to wear masks unless there were any confirmed or suspected cases. And then I had and just for your information, I remember speaking to one carer in a care home said, we had none at the start of this. We've now got 7 of our residents we care for in hospital, and nobody else has come into this facility. It's coming through the staff. We've brought this into them. I'm breaking the hearts on that, and I can't argue with that's been the case. So we're seeing that. I mean, it's been recognised now, but it wasn't recognised early enough, and this was in the first few weeks. And we have had some concerning stories from members in some GP practices across Staffordshire about really not really PPE. Sometimes it's intense to the social distancing measures. And then there would be a question, if I could get back to me, in terms of our staff going into other areas. I'm sure we're providing with the right PPE, but how are we assured that the social distancing measures within those facilities are okay and safe? Because we haven't got control of those environments, and often these things are just about flow of people through a building and things like that. So I'd be interested to know how we can get some assurances for our members having to go into places places like that. And just finally, you mentioned the show Racism and Red Card and the video task. It's an organisation, a charity that we've been heavily involved in Unison, and I think that video also features Roger Mackenzie, our Assistant General Secretary, and a friend of the Trust who's been up to visit Trust a few times. So we're absolutely brilliant that our Trust can be linked to such an amazing organisation. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Jen. Thanks ever so much. Are there any other questions for Peter before we move on?
It's Tony David. I've got one really, and it's about the Attend Anywhere video conferencing. Do we have any data in respect to the number of video consultations that we're doing at the moment compared to the face-to-face in an equivalent time previously, just to get a measure of whether or not we are backing off on actual consultations with patients?
I did see some national figures yesterday that said 90% was done at a distance and 10% was done face to face. But I don't know about our own experience.
So, Chair, it's I think we've got in a report on the closed session. There is some detail within an appendix there that sets all that detail out. But in headline level, we didn't particularly do video consultation prior to COVID. We did do remote consultation via telephone, but not particularly through video consultation. So over the past of the few weeks, we've essentially gone from a standing start specifically in relation to video consultation, and we've now got upwards of about 80 clinicians registered on Attend Anywhere, and we've done upwards of 200 consultations.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that. Yeah, I'm comfortable with the difference between video conferences now and prior to the to COVID. What I would like to understand is the volume of video consultation we're doing compared to previously the volume of physical face-to-face consultations.
Okay, sure. We'd have to have a look at that, Tony. We've not got that data to hand, but we can have a look at that.
Okay, we'll put that on action point, Tony. Thanks. Anybody else for Peter?
Just to say, Chair, sorry, in relation to the focus on Stoke-on-Trent and COVID prevalence, it's perhaps worth saying that it's probably more so about the northwest of the northern county. So it's not just Stoke-on-Trent; it picks up Newcastle-under-Lyme as well. I think so. That's where we're seeing the prevalence come through. And just this morning, at system level, we agreed a renewed focus specifically on that geography that will take place over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
Chair, could I just come back to that and link it to the previous question from Jenny in terms of the influence that we've got on the NHS systems body that we're part of? Because in a way, it's not just about how we manage our own trust, it's about the contribution that we make to the wider system, and in a way, what more we can do or what more pressure we can put on to make sure that wrong trend, if you like, in parts of Staffordshire, how we can contribute to that.
Yeah. Shall I just quickly?
Yes,
yeah, I mean it's a toughie, isn't it, in terms of those two elements, contribution and pressure. Pressure, I suppose I'd take firstly in that I think the system is gradually getting to a place of it is doing the right things. I think we're perhaps suffering from a bit of a legacy early on of not perhaps doing the right things in the right order. So concentrating on nursing homes from the outset. I've had conversations with various people about how internationally, whether it be Canada or other places, that was an absolute priority in the first instance. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? So there's something about doing the right things now, but just naturally, unfortunately, suffering from a legacy of the order in which things were done previously. So I think the pressure piece, I would probably suggest, isn't that needed now. I think people are doing a lot more of the right things. It's just we are where we are. And in terms of support, I mean, I mentioned a moment ago, didn't I, the amount of positive press, praise, thank yous from other members of the system, particularly in relation to our psychological inputs, counselling support, etc., for other parts of the system. And the fact that we've been willing and able to open up a ward to support the decant of patients out of UHNM through what is a mental health facility, but with predominantly physical health conditions, I think is, and of course at the same time, that then goes to the point that Jenny made around that we're adding to the natural concerns, fear of our staff that they will be entering into environments that are COVID positive. But as an organisation, we've stepped up and we've been willing to go, that extra mile in relation to that support for the system. So I wouldn't say this if I didn't think it, Joan. I genuinely believe as an organisation, we've done wonders in relation to that additional support piece. You can always do more, absolutely, but I think that comes from my perception of what we've done, but also the feedback that we've had. So I am
Thank
really
you.
pleased in terms of that support.
Okay, let's try and move on. It's inevitable in these circumstances that certainly Peter's report will be longer and be questioned more than perhaps usually, and maybe mine as well, but we'll see. I'm tolerant of the fact that this part of the meeting is going on a bit longer than it usually does. I hope that we can speed up a bit later on. Can I move on to my report, which I'll make really as brief as I possibly can, but to try and bring together a few broader things. Just on the way into it, just to say well done to Joe for organising communications on the broad front, really. As far as this meeting is concerned, sorting out how the public can ask questions, ask the board, and also communications between the trust leadership team and staff more generally. I think Jen's already mentioned that it has been first rate, and also inter-staff communication. You know, this combined, united opportunity to congratulate people who have done wonderful things has really taken off, amazing, and has been really powerful. So well done, Joe. And it sort of reflects an openness about the trust, which I rejoice in. You know, it's really important. So let's move on. One thing I can mention is that at the beginning of next month, we're welcoming a new director, associate director to the trust, who's Pauline Walsh. Pauline is the pro vice chancellor, I think there are several of them, up at Keele, but she's executive dean of medicine and health sciences. That means all the schools of medicine at Keele are under her responsibility. And so we're delighted to have her on board at a time where as we move forward and do things differently and evaluate those things, as we try and get a really good proposition for graduates from Keele to come and join us in teaching, as we get more involved in research, all those good things. To have Pauline on board is just superb, and I'm delighted, and I've just received her letter saying she's happy to join us, so that's great. Just one or two other things. There's a view of the NHS that because of the proposition that the real threat was the demand on acute services for COVID patients, the other parts of the service have been deferred, and patients will have to wait longer. That's absolutely inevitably true, and not just at our hospital, but at hospitals across the country, suddenly found themselves with 40% empty beds, 40% of people who had been, I don't know what the right expression is, but cleared out from those beds to make space, and there is a huge repercussion that will have to be dealt with over the next months and years. But as far as this trust is concerned, the service has remained fully operational. And that's a really important point to get across, mainly because we need to encourage people with growing mental health problems, and my goodness, that is so widespread, that we are open for business, and for goodness sake, ring, because the number of referrals is down with us. And we don't want that to happen, because we know the demand is actually much greater out in the population. King's Hospital in London and Imperial did some research a week or two ago, and they came back with the views that 45% of the general population says it's getting by. 45% would subscribe to being in a suffering group with depression or anxiety. 45%. And the other 10% tend to be young people who are resisting compliance with lockdown and everything else. But there we go. And this fear that pervades the place. It's easy to and been remarkably effective to lock things down. It's much more difficult to get people out again with the confidence that they will need. So in that same survey, if all schools open tomorrow, 40% of parents would keep their kids at home. And if all public transport was open and available tomorrow, 60% wouldn't use it. So the fear is all pervading, and it feeds into all sorts of mental health challenges, which are all out there. We don't know the numbers terribly well, but we need to keep ready for it, and that's crucial. My bit wouldn't be complete without thanking staff. Just amazing dedication and flexibility. So they've had to deal with challenges at work, they've had to deal with challenges at home, and they've managed also to, as we heard, support other providers across the patch wherever it's been needed, and that's absolutely fabulous, really good. So thank you. Two small things. One is Matt Johnson's guide, which is on the website for parents, for older people, for people with learning disabilities and autism. It's fabulous, and it's going viral because it's just perfectly tuned into what's needed. So I'm really very grateful that we've got him, that we've produced it, and that we're able to show it to a wider world. That's great. I think actually that's it. Let's move on, but I'm more than happy to try and answer any questions that people have got.
Before you move on, David, could you answer the question from Ian, member of the public?
Oh, I would be in appalling trouble if I didn't answer Ian Simon's question.
Thank you.
I've been trying to get Ian to come to these board meetings for ages because I'm not frightened. And he's a really well-informed chap, and is a very important part of the healthcare scene in these parts. He's sent a question in which is in two parts. First one is dealing with stress and anxiety amongst our own staff. I think we've dealt with that quite a lot already, but we already had a system in place. We've enhanced that system to deal with what are the three phases of a pandemic: the preparation, the in the thick of it active bit, and the recovery phase afterwards, which is what the British Psychological Society have advised. The NHS, actually, to its credit, has done a lot in this area, and we've sort of aligned and dovetailed what we've done to the work they're doing. They've got specialists on bereavement, they've got a 24/7 text service, and a virtual support group, and so on. So what we've done is tailored to augment that. And then, as has been said again already, we are leading the team that is providing support to staff across the whole system, and we're delighted to be doing that job, and that has reached much needed areas, not just at the hospital, but within the care home community and so on, and that we should be really proud of. The second part of Ian's question was about have we got any idea what's going to happen to demand over the next few months and years, and are we prepared for it? This is really difficult because it's very hard to estimate the volume of demand and the distribution across various presentations. There are a lot of studies going on at the moment, and I'm afraid this is one where I have to say we stress we're open for business. We welcome referrals. The sooner we get the referrals, the better the chance of recovery, etc. But we have no national guidance, apart from the sort of numbers I was giving you earlier on. No national guidance, although there's a lot of work going on now to show where it's happening. It's very strange. There are areas like older adults who are self-harming, which nobody saw coming. And so the distribution is really, really odd. But the one thing I can say about the way we're going to deal with it is that it's not a matter of standing within our perimeter and waiting for referrals. We have got to get out there in a coordinated way with not just other providers, but certainly the voluntary sector, certainly general practice, and the wider people in the community, the religious side of things, who will provide help and support across the wider community. And it's that coordination which we've seen grow really well in these forced circumstances that we need to ensure is there for the next few months and years. So that's that, I think, Ian, are the best answers I can give you.